It was a cold October evening when Claire Mason first heard the knock on her door. She lived in a quiet suburb where nothing ever happened. The soft, hesitant knock was so unexpected that it startled her. She put down her book and walked to the door, peering through the peephole. 2 children stood on her porch, a boy and a girl, both no older than 10. They were dressed in old-fashioned clothes, their faces obscured by the shadows. "Can I help you?" Claire called out, her voice wavering slightly. "Please, ma'am, can we come in? We're lost and need to use the phone," the boy replied, his voice flat and emotionless. Something about the situation felt wrong. Claire's instincts screamed at her to send them away, but she couldn't ignore 2 children in need. She opened the door slightly, just enough to see their faces. The children stepped into the light, and Claire gasped. Their eyes were pitch black, void of any whites or irises. "Who are you?" Claire stammered, her heart racing. "Please, ma'am," the girl repeated. "Let us in." Claire's mind was torn between concern and an overwhelming sense of dread. She could not look away from their eyes, those dark, soulless orbs that seemed to bore into her very soul. She shut the door abruptly, bolting it and backing away. The knocking resumed, louder and more insistent. "Let us in." The children's voices were now demanding, almost desperate. Claire covered her ears and retreated to the safety of her bedroom, locking the door behind her. She sat on her bed, trembling, as the knocking continued for what felt like hours. Then, as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. Silence enveloped the house, but Claire could not shake the image of those black eyes from her mind. Over the next few days, Claire tried to convince herself that it had been a nightmare or a cruel prank. But the fear gnawed at her, making her jump at every shadow and noise. She confided in her best friend, Emily, who listened with a mixture of concern and skepticism. "Claire, it was probably just some kids messing around," Emily said, sipping her coffee. "You've been under a lot of stress lately." Claire shook her head. "No, Emily, you didn't see their eyes. They were wrong, completely black. It felt like they were trying to steal my soul." Emily reached across the table and squeezed Claire's hand. "Maybe you should talk to someone about it. A therapist, or even the police." Claire nodded, though she doubted anyone would believe her. She decided to do some research on her own, hoping to find some explanation for the terrifying encounter. That evening, she scoured the internet, searching for any mention of black-eyed children. To her surprise, she found numerous accounts similar to hers. Stories of children with black eyes appearing at people's doors, asking to be let in, often during the night. The encounters were always accompanied by an overwhelming sense of dread, and those who let them in often experienced terrible misfortunes. Claire's unease deepened. The stories dated back decades, from various parts of the world. She read about a man who let the children into his home, only to fall mysteriously ill a few days later. Another account described a woman who was involved in a car accident after an encounter. The more she read, the more convinced she became that what she had experienced was real. Determined to find out more, Claire visited the local library, hoping to uncover some historical context for the phenomenon. She found nothing in the main collection, but an elderly librarian named Mrs. Hawthorne noticed her frustration and approached her. "Can I help you with something, dear?" Mrs. Hawthorne asked kindly. Claire hesitated, then decided to share her story. "I'm looking for information on black-eyed children. Have you ever heard of them?" Mrs. Hawthorne's expression turned serious. "Yes, I have, but it's not something we talk about openly. Come with me." She led Claire to a small, dusty room in the back of the library, filled with old books and manuscripts. Mrs. Hawthorne pulled out a worn journal and handed it to Claire. "This was written by my great-grandfather. He was a folklorist and recorded many local legends. There's a section about the black-eyed children." Claire opened the journal and began to read. The entries described various encounters with the children, dating back over a century. According to the journal, the children were not human but some kind of malevolent entities. They would appear during times of trouble, preying on the vulnerable and the fearful. The journal also mentioned a way to protect oneself. Never, under any circumstances, let them in. Mrs. Hawthorne placed a hand on Claire's shoulder. "These stories are more than just legends. My great-grandfather believed that the black-eyed children are harbingers of doom. Be careful, Claire." Claire thanked Mrs. Hawthorne and left the library, feeling both enlightened and more terrified than ever. She now knew she wasn't alone in her experience, but the knowledge did little to ease her fear. If anything, it made her more vigilant. A week passed without incident, and Claire began to hope that her ordeal was over. But on a rainy Saturday night, as she was settling in with a book, she heard the now familiar knock at her door. Her blood ran cold. She approached the door cautiously, peeking through the peephole. The same two children stood on her porch, drenched from the rain, their black eyes staring straight ahead. "Please, let us in," the boy said, his voice unnaturally calm despite the storm. Claire's heart pounded in her chest. "Go away," she shouted, her voice cracking. "Let us in," the girl repeated, her tone more insistent. Claire backed away from the door, grabbing her phone and dialing Emily's number. "Please, come over. They're back," she whispered, her voice shaking. Emily arrived 15 minutes later, finding Claire huddled in the corner of her living room, the knocking still echoing through the house. She wrapped her arms around Claire, trying to comfort her. "It's okay, Claire, I'm here," Emily said soothingly. The knocking ceased, and Emily cautiously approached the door. She peeked outside but saw no one. "They're gone," she said, turning back to Claire. Claire nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I can't do this, Emily. I feel like I'm losing my mind." Emily held her tighter. "We'll figure this out together. You're not alone." The next day, Emily convinced Claire to visit a local paranormal investigator named Marcus Hayes. He was known for his extensive knowledge of supernatural phenomena and had helped many people with their unexplained experiences. Marcus listened intently as Claire recounted her encounters with the black-eyed children. He nodded thoughtfully, his expression serious. "I've heard of these entities before," Marcus said. "They're often described as omens of misfortune. People who encounter them frequently experience a series of unfortunate events. The key is to never let them in, no matter what." Claire shuddered. "But why are they here? Why are they targeting me?" Marcus leaned back in his chair. "It's hard to say. They seem to be drawn to certain individuals for reasons we don't fully understand. But there are ways to protect yourself." He handed Claire a small pouch filled with herbs and crystals. "Keep this on you at all times. It's a protective charm. Also, consider placing iron objects around your home. Iron is believed to repel malevolent spirits." Claire took the pouch, feeling a glimmer of hope. "Thank you, Marcus. I just want this nightmare to end." "We'll do everything we can to help you," Marcus assured her. "But remember, you must stay strong. Fear gives them power. The more you resist, the weaker they become." Armed with the protective charm and iron objects placed strategically around her home, Claire felt a newfound sense of courage. Days passed without any sign of the black-eyed children, and she began to believe that the worst was over. But one night, as she was preparing for bed, the knocking returned. This time, it was more forceful, more urgent. Claire's heart raced, but she remembered Marcus's words. She couldn't let fear control her. She grabbed the pouch and approached the door. "Leave me alone," she shouted. The knocking stopped, and for a moment, there was silence. Then, a voice replied, softer, almost pleading. "Please, let us in. We're so cold." Claire closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. "You can't come in. You have no power here." The air grew colder, and the whispering began, filling the room with an eerie chorus. Claire clutched the pouch tightly, repeating Marcus's advice in her mind. She wouldn't give in to fear. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, but Claire stood her ground. "Leave," she commanded, her voice steady. Slowly, the whispers faded, and the temperature began to rise. Claire opened her eyes to find the house silent once more. She had faced the black-eyed children and won, at least for now. Claire knew she couldn't live in fear forever. She needed to find a way to end the curse for good. With Emily and Marcus's help, she delved deeper into the history of the black-eyed children, seeking any clue that might lead to it. They discovered that many of the encounters occurred near places with a history of tragedy and loss. Marcus theorized that the children might be spirits of those who had died tragically, unable to find peace. "We need to find the source," Marcus said. "If we can understand where they came from, we might be able to help them move on." Claire remembered a news story about a tragic accident that had occurred near her neighborhood years ago. 2 children had drowned in a nearby lake under mysterious circumstances. It seemed too coincidental to ignore. The trio visited the lake, hoping to find answers. As they stood by the water's edge, Claire felt a chill run down her spine. She could almost hear the faint whispers of the black-eyed children. Marcus performed a ritual to communicate with the spirits, asking for their story. Slowly, the air grew heavy, and a vision appeared before them. The children, their eyes filled with sorrow, showed them the events of that fateful day. They had been playing near the lake when they fell in and couldn't escape. Their spirits had been trapped, seeking help, but their appearances only brought fear. Understanding the children's plight, Claire, Emily, and Marcus worked to perform a ritual to release the spirits from their torment. They offered prayers, flowers, and toys at the lake, creating a memorial for the lost children. As they completed the ritual, the air grew warm, and a sense of peace enveloped them. Claire felt a profound release, as if a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She knew the spirits had found their peace. From that day forward, the knocking ceased. Claire no longer lived in fear, and the memory of the black-eyed children became a distant echo. She continued her life with a newfound appreciation for the power of compassion and understanding. The legend of the black-eyed children remained, but Claire's encounter served as a reminder that even in the darkest of legends, there could be a path to peace and resolution. Years later, Claire shared her story with others, not to frighten them, but to offer hope. She wanted people to understand that sometimes even the most terrifying encounters could be resolved with empathy and courage. The black-eyed children, once figures of fear, became symbols of a different kind of strength. The strength to face one's fears, seek understanding, and ultimately find peace. Claire's journey had shown her that even in the darkest moments, there was always a way to bring light.